Howdy, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast, brought to you by the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum, located right here in downtown Pawhuska, Oklahoma. Hey, it's old Cody right here, and as always, I have my co-host with me, Mr. Rodeo Historian himself, Mr. Historian Everything himself, Jimbo Snively. Hey, Jimbo, it's good to see you this morning. And who do we have today?
Hey, Cody boy, good to see you, and it's another great day in Osage. Cody, we got the best-selling author, Mr. Dale Lewis, with us today. Over 50 years ago, EC Mullendore, a prominent Osage County rancher, was murdered, and it took the whole country, shocked everybody around here for sure. And it never was solved officially. And his bodyguard, Chub Anderson, who was with him the night he was killed, later on, they never could charge him, and about 20 years later, he got arrested for a unrelated charge, and he jumped bond and was in hiding for, 15, 16 years up in Montana. And they brought him back. They finally caught him, brought him back, and Dale, when he came back, Dale developed a relationship with him and visited with him on a regular basis. And after Chub died, of course, Chub related a lot of the facts of the murder case to him, and after Chub died, Dale wrote a book called Footprints in the Dew, which you can get here at the museum. Great book. I read it and couldn't put it down, and possibly solved the murder in the book. So we'll just have to read the book to find out. But anyway, we're going to get into all that. And Dale, welcome to Cowboys of the Osage podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. Thank you.
I actually think he goes by Buffalo Dale.
Yeah,
Jimbo.
How'd you come up with that?
Well, I'd been writing a weekly column for a chain of papers out of New York, and I came up with that name actually watching a John Wayne movie where it was and it just kind of come out of the blue, I guess. And then the original part was from I think that was True Grit when it was one of the outlaws was the original Bob or something like that, and I like that original Bob. He got killed by John Wayne, I think, down when John Wayne said, "Put the guns in your hands, you so and so."
Yeah, right.
But anyways, that's where that came from, and my column had been running for a long time when Chub got a hold of me.
Yeah. Are you still doing the column?
I resigned my column about a month ago.
I remember reading it a lot in the Barnesville paper.
How many papers was it in?
6 or 7, always in the Bartlesville paper, and it always been in the Pawhuska paper, but it was in some other small papers, and once in a while someone nationally would pick it up.
How do you get picked up to be a columnist, picked up by several different, syndicated columnist? How's that all start for you?
Well, I just send my column in, and they send me a small check every month, and once I send it in, they send it out to their other newspapers around the country, and if one of the editors wants to pick it up, they paid for it, so they can pick it up and run with it. I don't keep track of where it goes. I know it's been in the Examiner and over here in Pawhuska for 20 years.
Yep.
This book you wrote, it's primarily about the Oklahoma outlaw, Chub Anderson. What was Chub's past like?
What was his past?
Yeah, what made Chub Chub?
Well, Chub had a charisma to him, I felt, that really drew people, probably more outlaws than regular folks to him. But I found that it was about 50-50. There were a lot of nice folks that thought Chub was a pretty nice fella. And, of course, there are a lot of outlaws that he hung around with. He's got quite a criminal record. That's all listed in the book. But he had a charisma to him for sure, and especially for women. Lots of women.
What's some of the crimes he did in his early days?
Well, his record starts out in 1960 with forgery and grand theft auto in Amarillo, Texas. In 65, he got busted for cattle rustling right here in Osage County, and did 7 years down at McAllister for that one. '69, he got busted for speeding and unpaid traffic tickets and driving without a license. 1970, when the murder happened, he actually got busted for parole violations and a gun control felony. He was carrying a gun around, and he wasn't supposed to, of course. And then he's got another string of them. Do you want me to go on? It goes for a little while.
So he has a rap sheet that's this thick.
He did.
One of those typical deals.
He just seemed like, and like Dale said, he was a likable guy. You know, I was around him a little bit, worked with him on one job, and he was just a likable kind of a guy. But obviously, he just couldn't hardly stay out of trouble. You know, even, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but even when he was in Montana, on the run, trying to keep a low profile, he had a brush or two with the law. You know,
Oh, yeah.
which is just blows my mind. You know,
Yeah, that's pretty wild to think about that.
yeah.
There's a fella still missing up in Montana that they think that Chub took care of him. It was Chub's second girlfriend up there, and they were up in a bar, Chicks. It's in the book. They were up in a bar called Chicks, and the guy was kind of working Chub a little bit and not calling him a sissy, but it might as well, and Chub just laughed it off. They never saw him again after that night.
He could fight. He wasn't a big guy, but he was built pretty good, and he could really fight. He said that he had to whip 2 or 3 of them in McAllister before they left him alone, you know, when he was in prison down there.
Well, even in Lansing, when they brought him back from Montana, he was pretty sick. He sat down at the wrong table at the dining room there, and some Spanish guys were getting in his face, and Chub got right back in their face, and he was pretty sick fella then, but he wasn't taking nothing from nobody, even in those days. So,
what made you get interested in this case to begin with?
Well, I'd always heard of the Mullendore murder, but when they captured him, he started writing me from Lansing, and I'd never met the fella before, and the cops wanted me to go up and talk to him because he would not talk to them, wouldn't talk to George Wyman. Bart Perrier was the cold case investigator at the time, and they tried to go up there and talk to Chub. That's in the book also. I don't want to keep talking about the book, Cody. You won't be selling them if I tell the whole story.
Oh yeah, so, everyone's going to be interested in this story.
But he got a hold of me, and the cops wanted me to go up and visit with him. He wouldn't even talk to his family. I was the only one he wound up talking to. And he started writing me letters from the prison, and I would see him every week on Saturdays, and that's how we got started.
Right. Every week?
Every week.
Over how long a period before he died?
He was locked up at Lansing for about 6 months before they turned him loose, mostly because of his bad health. He had several things wrong with him. And then when they released him, he continued to call me, and it was I never pressed him on the Mullendore thing. That was kind of my thought. Everyone for years had been asking him about the Mullendore thing. So I just wanted to ask him about his family life and this and that, and he wanted his life story told. But I remember one time we met up in Nitez. When he got out of prison, he could only go to Oklahoma because the DA in Washington County, Rick Esser, put out an arrest warrant for him, so he stayed up in Nitez. But I remember going up to see him one day to interview him, and he said, "No, don't come up." Said Lonnie Brown's coming up today. Said, "You got to stay away from Lonnie Brown." And I didn't have a clue at the time what he was talking about, but I did know who Lonnie Brown was, a nice fella. And I knew Lonnie Brown was in the hay hauling business back in the day on the Mullendore Ranch. And I learned soon that Lonnie Brown played a little bigger role than just hauling hay.
You know, I read the first book, and back whenever it came out, and They just mentioned Lonnie Brown one time in that book, and it was about his hay hauling. He just called him a hay hauler, and he was driving too fast or something. That was the only mention of him in that book.
That was the day of the murder, and he would not be interviewed by Jonathan Twitney, who is the author of the Mullendore murder case. And actually, Jonathan Twitney didn't hardly interview anyone involved in it. He did interview George, and that's in the book too. I talked to George about it quite a bit.
Yeah. The odd thing about Chub in Montana that surprised me was he allowed himself to be photographed. And he contacted people back here. Were they looking for him that hard? Who was actually looking for him? The bail bond, the company?
Here in Oklahoma, he'd jumped bail.
Yeah, but I mean, they couldn't look for all over the world for $10,000 or something, could they? I mean, was anybody really looking for him that bad?
Yeah, there were 3 bail bondsmen pretty hot on his trail, but a couple people knew where he was, but they were pretty close and tight-lipped.
Sure.
But they were looking for him, and that bail bond wasn't as much. Over the years, it had grown to be millions of dollars, and it wasn't very much money.
Right. That's what I mean. I knew
they were looking for him.
Yeah, but it just seemed like he wasn't keeping as low a profile as I would have thought a guy would,
Well, it was kind of crazy, He had a bank account up there. We have a check right here in the museum from Jack Everett, and also a business card. You can weld anything but a broken heart's what it says. And I've heard that he was up there. He'd go to parties at Ted Turner's place and take a picture with Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of Russia at the time. So it's just pretty wild. He wasn't keeping that low of a profile. It didn't seem like, in hindsight, looking back at what was going on up there.
Did you ever know why he went to Montana to begin with?
Yeah, he had been up there hunting a few years earlier with a couple of these friends that knew where he was, and pretty remote place up there, and he had went to Mexico first, but he couldn't speak Spanish, and he told me it was just hard to get around and do anything, and he decided to take his horse and head up to Montana. So that's why he went there. He'd been there before.
Yeah, he was really into hunting and outdoors. I know that, and Lonnie the same way.
Yeah, he had quite a reputation for hunting up there in Montana. Lonnie Brown actually shipped him a dog so he could train it to hunt mountain lions, and he took the sheriff on a mountain lion hunt one time. So
when I worked with Lonnie, he always carried a .22 250 in his gun rack and had one of those big varmint barrels on it, and we'd just be going down the road, and one of us seen a coyote. Now he pulled off the road and he could hit that sucker, no matter how far off it was. If you could see him, he could hit it. So they were big into guns.
Yeah, Chub had always been into guns. And he had a whole lot of them up there in Montana. As he started getting sick, he with this kidney disease, that he had claimed he'd been welding these buffalo pins for Ted Turner for a couple of years, and he had ordered some pipe, and Lonnie had actually set that deal up down here in Oklahoma. And them boys made a little bit of money off of it, but the pipe he sent off had a Teflon coating in it. And Chub should have known better, but he kept on welding that pipe up for these buffalo pins, and he was making dang good money. And that's what started all this cancer that he got.
Yeah. Huh. Well, when he was up there, he had several friends, several girlfriends, and everything, didn't he? And still got in trouble with the law.
Yeah, he had a couple I've interviewed him for the book, a couple of very nice ladies. And the second one, Chub wound up growing, she had a little ranch up there, and Chub wound up growing a little pot on the back of it, and she found it and got upset and kind of was trying to boot him out. And she got her another boyfriend, and this boyfriend kind of got in Chub's face at Chick's Bar, the only bar in, I don't know, miles and miles. And Chub just sat there and took it. And I think that's the way a real bad guy is. Chub just took there and took it all night, and this guy was grabbing this woman and dancing with her, but they never saw him again after that night. And most of the locals up there think that Chub did this fella in that evening. Yeah. So that's just another one of those stories, kind of like the the bond money, how much
Right,
had grown
right,
up. So
right.
who knows?
He had a passion for marijuana. I don't know if he liked to smoke it, but he sure liked to grow it, didn't he?
Yeah, he pretty good green thumb, and he did like to smoke pot. He smoked pot on occasion up whenever I was interviewing him.
Yeah.
And up in Kansas, that was at Keith Atkins' oil field. Keith had a metal building there and let Chub move into it.
Yeah.
Kind of felt for him a little bit. Keith has made it very plain, though, in public that he did not like Chub Anderson. He loved the Anderson family, but he didn't think much of Chub. So he took Chub in because he liked the family.
Yeah.
What do the people up there in Montana think of it after this all came out in the wash that he really wasn't Jack Everett? He was Chub Anderson on the run from the law.
Most of them knew that he probably was not who he said he was.
Really?
And most of them up there knew that he was kind of a dangerous fella probably and didn't really go too far with him. But they liked him. I mean, he had his personality just kind of, but if you crossed him, he still liked you, but you might pay later.
Right.
So.
Yeah. But
I've never met anyone that saw him get whipped.
yeah.
He did like to land that first blow, and I've heard many people say that. So.
Yeah. It surprised me too. You know, he was a convicted felon from that cattle rustling deal, and but every time he'd get caught, that marijuana, he'd always have a truckload of guns. You know, half of them stolen. You know, and he just. I don't know.
And all loaded.
Yeah. He just couldn't stay out of trouble. You know.
When he got busted for the big pot patch up at Pat Scudder's ranch, they found 62 guns, most of them stolen, hidden all over the place up there, and most of them were loaded.
Yeah.
And and a lot of other stolen stuff.
You know, a lot of the intrigue to that murder case was that the ranch was in trouble, and they'd taken out this big life insurance policy on EC. I guess the largest one in U.S. history at that time, and the mafia. You know, the ranch was in trouble, and there was reports of the mafia up there, and he was trying to get money from them, and there were just a lot of side stories to the whole thing. You know, and it just tweaked everybody's interest in the story because there was so many things going on. Was there anything to the mafia deal, or do you know?
Yeah, Chub and I talked about that quite a bit. You know, on the murder itself, I don't know if you fellas know this. I've been subpoenaed by the Attorney General to a multi-county grand jury investigation and put under a gag order concerning the murder, and I'm kind of
still under that.
Well, I'm not under it any longer, but they've asked me not to say a few things about the murder because even though Chub's been dead since 2010, and now Lonnie Brown is also dead, who Chub implicated in the murder, the people that I work with that are helping me, I have 2 lawyers, and we're trying to push this to a real movie. You know, who could invent a story like this? 400,000 acre rancher, family owned the New Orleans Saints football team, shot between the eyes in the middle of the night, right outside of Pawhuska here, about 10 miles, and he held the largest life insurance policy ever written on anyone in the country. You couldn't make this story up, and this is a true thing.
Right.
So,
and throw the mafia in there too, you know.
You got the mafia. Chub said, and the FBI and everybody was at the ranch the next morning. Chub told them that the people that killed EC Mullendore and shot him were the same people that killed President Kennedy, who had just been killed a few years earlier. So, and that's in the book too.
Yeah. You know, one thing, I got acquainted with Dale Court, probably 8 or 9 years after the murder. He was living up in Thayer, Kansas, and we built a barn for him. And one day he come out and said, Wayman's come to see me over the weekend, and he said he still thinks Chub did it. So Dale didn't think Chub did it at that time. Now, he may have changed his mind. Did he ever, you interviewed him, did he ever?
Yeah, I interviewed Dale a lot. He had moved over to Arkansas to Grand Prairie, I think, down. He passed away about 4 years ago. No, he did not think that Chub would have done that. You're correct on that.
I know.
And I showed him the tape well, I'm going to get into something that I shouldn't be talking about. Chub, I taped Chub, what he was talking about, the murder. But he kind of changed his mind. Paul Kelly was also there on the ranch. He wasn't the first one on the scene, but he did travel with EC and Chub, and Paul Kelly just didn't think that Chub would have done it either. Chub was quite a fella.
Yeah,
he was quite a fella. Yeah. And
but here Dale was really close. He was the first guy Chub talked to after the murder.
Correct.
And you know he was really close to the situation, and still he didn't think Chub did it. That always made me kind of wonder, you know.
Yeah, Chub ran over to Dale's house about a block away and told him to get a gun, and he was crying, and the Chub I'm talking about was crying and saying, get a gun and come quick, EC's been shot, and so that's what Dale did. Dale jumped in, grabbed a .22 and jumped in his truck and jumped the fence and drove right over there with his lights shining right into the house.
Yeah. I wonder how Chub got sucked in so tight with EC. You know, he's ex-con. He showed up as a welder, you know.
Yeah, and he's a cattle thief going to work on one of the biggest ranches in Oklahoma.
Yeah. How many cattle
served
thieves
7 years down in McAllister for
do you hire on your ranch, you know? And then before you know it, he's EC's right-hand man. Mm-hmm. How'd that all come about? Did Chub ever talk about that?
Well, he started out building fences out there after he got out of McAllister, if I remember right. And then he was such a good welder, and they welded fences, and then he kind of backed up EC, and you'd have to get into EC's personal, into his life to see why he would put a man like Chub to work. Mm-hmm. And I've told Katsy, EC's sister, that I would not get into EC's life. Mm-hmm. I may later, but right now I'm going to let EC's, because I wasn't out there, so I don't know for sure why EC would put him on there. But you know, EC's character was we're all different.
Sure.
And EC was different too, and you hear the stories that Chub saved EC from all kinds of beatings and stuff, and I think that's been exaggerated a lot too. Mm-hmm. But why EC hired him, I don't know.
Yeah. Cody, if you leave town going up to Buffalo Ranch, and you go up past Williams Park, you know, all that, and you get out in the open past all the houses, notice that fence on the left. That used to be Mullendore country. I think it's Mormon now. But just look at that fence Chub built, 1968 or 69 probably. Used 7-inch corner posts. The posts were on 10-foot centers with a stay in between them, and the fence is still good. It's 55 years old. But anyway, my point is that EC had fence like that built all over the ranch, and it cost so much money. It got the ranch in, one of the things that helped get the ranch in financial trouble, doing all that fencing. It was really expensive, and all the locals talked about that fence. What a heck of a, and it was overbuilt, what I'm trying to say, you know, with the stay, 10-foot centers plus a fence stay in between them, you know, it was kind of overbuilt, but it's still up there, and it's still a good fence. You have to pay attention to it sometime you go up there. Chub built
Someone
that.
really does need to write a story just on the Mullendores themselves, I think, because it's such an interesting story. You know, they're so, you know, socialites of the area, for sure, of Oklahoma. They would have these extravagant parties, you know, and they'd print their own money, Mullendore money, and give it to them in a Mullendore ranch wallet, you know, so they could gamble and buy booze and stuff. We got some on display in here. It's just such an interesting story about some of those guys, you know, and EC Mullendore seemed like a real character himself, you know.
And the old man, he was another story all to himself, you know, from what my Uncle Joe was working up there when EC was killed. And I still remember like yesterday when we got the call that Sunday morning, I think it was, that EC had been killed. It was sure a shock to everybody.
What did your Uncle Joe think?
Oh, he didn't sure. He thought Chub was definitely capable of beating EC to death. I remember him saying that way on back there. But
Well, EC's wife had left just a few days earlier with his kids, and if that had happened to you, I'm sure you'd be going kind of wild. And EC found out that Chub had Linda's phone number and had been telling Linda what he was up to and where he was going, and even telling Linda that Chub was coming to Tulsa to look at a couple of places. And EC found that out. And, you know, Chub's not, you can push him, but EC kind of went a little bit too far. But then again, I'm going to kind of keep that under my hat.
EC was a tough little. I mean, you know, he wasn't a fighter, but he would sure fight. I guess, you know, from what I understand, you know, and he wasn't just going to lay down. And if he got mad at Chub and drunk too, you know, I could see where he could have jumped on Chub and started this whole deal. But who knows?
Such a wild story, you know. Even all the way down to the swimming pool they have in their backyard that's in the shape of their brand. So I mean, it's just. It's just a story for the ages. The whole thing, every little twist and turn about it.
Now, have they made a bed and breakfast, or going to make something up there out of that?
Yeah, I think it just sold. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it sold 3 or 4 months ago, and they are offering. You can actually rent it now. They offered elder care to have their Good, Bad, and the Barbecue fundraiser out there this year, but Elder Care already had it set up for the Hughes Ranch, which is a famous ranch also over in the Osages here, and that's going to be Mother's Day weekend. I've been helping them a little bit with that.
What is that Good, Bad, and Barbecue? I've been hearing all about it for years and years and years. I've never been, but
this is the 25th year, and it's just a fundraiser for Elder Care, which is an organization that helps seniors stay home as long as in their own homes as long as they can, and they send people to clean up your house if you're a senior, and even to do a little cooking for you. It's a great organization for seniors in Bartlesville, but they do service people here in Pawhuska too. Elder Care does, but the ranch was on the block, and I heard that it was for sale. And Elder Care asked Robert Hughes if Robert would let him have it over there on his ranch, and Robert agreed. And so Mother's Day weekend, that's really going to be a big thing. I looked at their schedule just a couple days ago. They've got like 30 sponsor tables already. And actually, Cody here's donated some stuff from the museum for the silent auction. So, but,
wow. Everybody get over there. Some big time stuff we donated.
Well, I never did understand in the book the old gal that married Chub there toward the end. What was her angle? Did you ever figure that out?
Well, I think it was, I got along good with her for a while. She wound up turning on Keith Atkins, who was Chub's power of attorney, appointed by a judge, and then Margaret Bird was his in-home nurse, and this woman turned on Margaret. These things are mentioned in the book. She turned on Margaret, and then she knew that I was writing Chub's life story. I was over there. She'd drop in, and I would be taking notes, and Chub would be talking to me. But I told her that I was going to put her in the book, and she got all upset, and then she turned on me. And Chub would call me and say she's not going to be here today, or she's not going to be here this afternoon, and that's when I would go up and see him, up to about a week before he died.
I just never could figure out what her end game was.
Yeah, it's such a crazy thing. The way Buffalo Dell wrote it, she was a younger girl, very, very good looking. Chub, he's sick with all this stuff. He's even wearing adult diapers in there, and you know, it is crazy what her end game was.
It didn't add up.
School teacher from Independence, and actually that's Coffeyville, I believe. I'm sorry. Good-looking girl, had her own house. She'd from her grandfather, and Chub went over there and stayed a few times, but the woman had like 8 or 9 cats, and always let them in the house.
That'd be a deal breaker for me, right?
Chub never liked that. He said the only thing cats were for was for shooting. So,
yeah, it's just everybody has to read that book just because, there's so many twists and turns. Even in his later life, it's crazy. He moves in. This young girl moves in with him, marries him, and changing his adult diapers. I mean, I just don't understand it whatsoever. But it sure made for another great chapter in that book. Holy moly! And Margaret Bird. I got acquainted with her years and years ago, and I didn't know that she was in the book until me and my wife, we read the book, and Lauren said, I wonder if this is that same Margaret Bird you do business with all the time. And I said, I wonder if that's the same Margaret Bird I do business. She's from up there in Kansas. So, long story short, she comes in to buy some Pendleton blankets from me when I had that store. And I asked her, and she said, yeah. So she filled me in quite a bit on Chub's life and stuff when she knew him. She grew up with him, and they were classmates in school. And she brought quite a few of his things. Oh, she's the one that brought the check from Chub and the business card from Chub. And we even got Chub's coat from when he was on the run and has his gray hair shed off in it still, and pictures of him wearing it. So it's just a small world out there, really small world. I couldn't believe it was the Margaret Bird coming in to do business with me from the book. So
she saved Chub. She was absolutely gold for Chub, and he treated her like really bad.
You'll find that out in the book. He does treat her horrible.
Yeah, and that kind of turned Keith even more against Chub, because this Margaret Bird would come over there and bring him breakfast, and he would wind up having troubles with his diapers, and the floor would be messed, and she'd get down on her hands and knees and clean it up. And as soon as she would leave, he would go to bad-mouthing her, and Keith just couldn't hardly take that. And he got in Chub's face about it once, and about being nice to Margaret, but she kept on going, even up till the very end when they put him in a nursing home there for a few months. Well, I think it was a relief to myself and Keith, because it was driving her kind of nutty too. So.
That was kind of a wild deal when he got in the nursing home. There was another party that was trying to get, for whatever reason, information out of Chub and stuff. What was that all about? Or can you talk about it?
Yeah, I could probably mention that a little bit. Gary Glantz is one of the top investigators really in the country. The Wall Street Journal's wrote stories about him. He's top of the line out of Tulsa. He had been hired by EC's widow. He was there the day after the murder, the next day with the widow and John Arrington, who, as you may know, wound up marrying EC's widow. But he always wanted to talk to Chub and trying to find out where he was. Even he couldn't find out where Chub was up in Montana. And then whenever Chub started writing me, he found out that I was interviewing Chub, and he contacted me, and he wanted to talk to Chub, and Chub would not talk to him at all. And Chub thought that he was tied up with Bill Curtis from A&E Television. And Bill Curtis had talked to Chub briefly and told Chub that Gary Glantz thinks you killed EC Mullendore, and Chub had a fit up at the courthouse and said, well, why don't you just go talk to Gary Glantz? What are you messing with me for? Mm-hmm. And but Gary always wanted to go up there and talk to him, and just out of the blue one day, Chub said, well, just bring him up here. And I did, and we met Chub at the restaurant there in Caney. And I secretly tape recorded that interview. And I'll be dang, when we all left, I wasn't out of that cafe 10 minutes. Gary called me, and he'd left Chub too. Chub had went back. And he said, I got a strange feeling you were tape recording me. And I said, you got that right. And he blew a fuse on that, because he said some personal things, trying to get things out of Chub. And me sitting in the back seat, I saw what he was doing. And I had that tape recorder strapped on my leg. And he was so intense with Chub, he didn't see that I'd put my leg up on the seat even to get where I could hear that thing a little bit better. But he was saying all kinds of things, trying to trip Chub up, and as a third party in the back, it was pretty obvious, but Chub saw it too. Chub didn't give in too much. he did tell Gary that he had figured it out from day one, and that was about as far as he went with Gary. And Gary came back up there as Chub got sicker and sicker. And back to your story about the nursing home, he brought Clark Brewster, pretty famous attorney. Him and Clark snuck in up there when all the staff late in the evening were gone and were trying to interview Chub. And this is in the book.
What were they wanting, though? I mean, what was their end game?
They wanted Chub to tell them that he'd killed EC.
And then so they could solve the case, I mean, basically, or write a book? Or...
Well, yeah, it's a pretty famous thing.
Yeah, it was,
Although Clark Brewster's been involved with some big cases, he drove all the way up to Coffeyville from Tulsa, and Gary thought that they had it all wrapped up, and Chub didn't give him nothing, but it was quite a story. It's just another chapter for the movie, really. So, and I've seen Clark here. I don't know if he really knows who I am, but I've seen him in some other cases that I've covered for the paper, and he's been cordial to me. So, but Gary doesn't. I like Gary Glantz. If you ever needed somebody that's Gary Glantz's work, he's the one you'd want to hire.
Now, is he Harvey Glantz's brother?
Yes, the sheriff.
The sheriff,
cousin.
Okay, cousin. Okay.
And there's a group of them. They're all buddies, Clark and Gary, and so.
Yep. Oh.
Chub, he became kind of a celebrity after all this, didn't he?
Oh yeah, I'd say so.
I wonder. I've heard tell, but I don't know for sure. I'm going to ask you. They have a big thing over there, Phillips, Woolarock, once a year that Frank Phillips started a long time ago, called the Outlaw and Lawman Reunion.
Cow Thieves and Outlaws.
Cow Thieves and Outlaws Reunion. Did Chub ever come back to that when he was on the run?
No, but when they captured him, there was rumor that he was going to show up there and he would have a 24-hour window when the DA wouldn't arrest him. And that was all a made-up story just to sell some tickets to the event. But the DA thought that it was a real story, and he called Keith Atkins up in Caney and said, if Chub comes to Oklahoma, I'm going to arrest him. And so...
So he didn't come to the...
No, he never went up there.
The Cow Thieves Reunion. I always heard that he did, and he had 24 hours lead time or whatever it was.
That didn't ever happen, but the DA thought that he was going to go. That is a true story. And I think Bart Perrier was my main contact with the sheriff's office. When Chub started talking and sending me the letters, I had a private investigator armed guard license myself. I had been doing some security work for Vince Gill and some other high-end entertainers around the country. And I thought that I might be getting into something that would that the law enforcement should know about. And I went up, and Bart took me into his office, and I told him what was going on, and he immediately got hot after it. And I always kept Bart involved, but I never crossed Chub. And I told Bart from the start that I wasn't going to be a pawn for the sheriff's office, but I would keep him informed. And they knew that I was tape recording Chub. And then they asked me to listen to those. They asked to listen to those tapes. And Gettner Drummond was representing me a little bit, and he didn't think that was a good idea, and they subpoenaed me to get those tapes. But my relationship with the sheriff's office had always been good, so I was fine with letting them listen to the tapes. And then they went after Chub after they heard those tapes up in Kansas.
Did Chub know you were going to write a book?
Yeah, he wanted me to write the book.
Okay.
Yeah. He contacted me with the letters and the phone calls.
Okay, that was the whole idea, him contacting you. Okay.
And I don't know if he meant to tell me what happened.
Yeah.
But with me not asking him like everybody else was, what happened, I just let him bring it to me, and it was almost natural. He just kept on talking because I never said, well, did you kill him or what happened? And he just brought it out to me. So.
Wow.
There's also videotapes that you taped, isn't there?
videotapes that we've put into the documentary film with Chub talking about what happened. And we showed it here in Pawhuska, and we're going to show it again. We may show it over here at the theater maybe this summer. And Chub tells you what happened in the videotapes.
Really?
So.
Yeah, we had Bart on our podcast here just a while back, and he gave us his take and his thoughts on Chub and the case.
Did Chub implicate Lonnie on the tapes?
He did. Now, you're worming this out of me. You two guys quit that. I'm not supposed to be talking about
we've been doing
this.
these podcasts for a long time.
Jimbo's one of the best.
I don't want to really talk about the murder just a whole lot.
Right.
But, yeah, you're going to find out what happened. And if you don't believe the book when you see the movie, I think most of the people that have seen the documentary, if they had any doubt at all what happened that night on who killed EC, they don't after they see what Chub says. So.
Yeah. I don't want to get into Lonnie Brown much myself. Like I say, I worked with him for 2 years and really considered him a friend, and
I like Lonnie Brown.
He was good to me.
Oh, yes. Lonnie Brown was, you probably know this. He was kind of tied up with Chub in a lot of Chub's activities. Lonnie had got busted for stealing pigs also. When there was a bunch of guys stealing back in those days. And I'm going to say that's back in the early 60s.
But he'd have just been a kid then.
He was a kid.
For sure.
But he worshipped Chub Anderson.
I know he did.
And Chub had married Lonnie's sister. And Lonnie kind of grew up out there around old Chub, and he kind of liked the way Chub handled themselves. And from what Chub told me, them two cleaned up a couple of beer joints before. Yeah. And I don't mean with a mop, I mean with their fist.
Right,
so.
right.
Here recently, you've kind of got you told me, I don't know if you can talk about it or not, that you've been going down to McAllister. Somehow they've wrapped you up in going and witnessing executions.
My weekly column has got me, they pulled me up. These state executions had been on hold for about 10 years, and because my column runs in a lot of other towns, the first execution was John Grant, and he had killed a prison guard, a woman. She was supervising the cooks who were inmates, and one of the inmates pulled out a shiv, put his hand around her mouth and stabbed her 18 times in the chest. And he'd been on death row for 26 years. But the reason that they pulled me is because my weekly column runs over there in Hominy. So they like to have a reporter from the local town, if possible, witness the executions. So they had me and the Associated Press guy and a news anchor from Channel 2 and 2 other reporters out of 40. They gave us seats, and they pulled them out of a hat for the other 3 to witness this execution. And it was about John Grant was strapped down about 5 foot in front of me. And it went kind of like what you may have read. The state has said that it went smoothly. There's a trial going on now down at the federal courthouse that I thought they wrapped up last week on the next execution that's supposed to be going on. These guys are filing cases saying that it's inhumane. So they pulled me down there to testify last Monday and Tuesday on what I saw. And the guy's a pretty rough fella, but I'd rather be shot than what he went through. But most people say he deserved it. So.
Well, he ended up dead.
Yeah, he's dead. Took him about 42 minutes.
Holy moly, but here a while back, Jimbo, I'm going totally off subject here. I'm sorry, Buffalo Dale. A guy lived through the lethal injection. Totally lived through it right here in Oklahoma. How does that happen?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That was several years ago, wasn't it? I mean,
well, it wasn't that long ago.
That's when they quit doing it, though, isn't it? For a while, they were going to reevaluate the dosage and all that.
Yeah, I think so. They had stopped them for about 10 years.
Yeah. I remember the case you're talking about.
Maybe one of the first ones back. I'm not sure. They've had a lot of trouble with that here lately.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know what was wrong with the electric chair or the gas chamber. And I mean, seriously, it worked for years, and And I guess they were...
Hanging seems pretty
well
fail-proof.
Yeah, firing squad, any of that. That girl he stabbed, she didn't die smoothly either.
No. We got off on something weird there.
Well, the last guy was about 3 weeks ago, and he had killed 4 people. And he'd been on death row for 18 years. So, and I might be off on those years. He'd been on death row for a long time.
Yeah.
Were you down there for that one?
I went down. They did not pull me up to go behind the walls. They took me back behind the barbed wire and pulled the names out, but I was not pulled to go back. The only one I've actually been behind the walls and witnessed was the first one, John Grant. And then the second one was the fellow that had all the support from the celebrities and movie stars and stuff, that the governor granted him a life, and that was in the 1st of December. And I thought the story would be outside where all the protesters were, so I didn't go behind the walls on the second one. And it was pretty interesting, but Governor Stitt granted him the stay, or the life, about an hour before he was set to be strapped down. So,
when Chub was in prison down in McAllister, did he ever compete in the prison rodeo?
I should ask him that.
I'm real interested about that.
No, I didn't ever ask him that. I wish I had it, Cody. What we talked about when he was in McAllister was the murder of the Klettler family, because when they captured Chub working for Ted Turner, they sentenced him to Lansing, and that's where Hickok and Smith from the Klettler family murders that made the movie in Cold Blood, that's where they were held, and that's where they were hung at, and they actually kept Chub in one of those cells that Hickok was in, and that's what we talked about a little bit. And he was locked up in McAllister when those murders happened, and they kind of made news around the McAllister prison because they hung him. And Chub remembered that, and he remembered in Cold Blood, the movie. He was a real fan of the movie star that Robert Blake's. And so we talked about that, but I wish I had asked him about the prison rodeo.
He had to be involved in the prison rodeo.
I think he would have been.
He'd have been a star recruit for the prison rodeo, I'd have to say.
He's the only man that I could find that had scored a perfect score in bull riding, and he won a bunch of saddles and buckles, but he usually gave them all away. He didn't have really anything, and the ones he had up in Montana were auctioned off to pay for his dialysis treatment that he was receiving. So when they brought him back, he didn't have anything, and when I went up to get his stuff, he had hid it out, and he drew a little map where it was, and he didn't have nothing, a few clothes and some letters and some audio tapes, and he had taped himself up there hunting, and those movies are in the film that I put together to the documentary. So.
That one of his friends up there came down here to see him, didn't he? He and his wife?
Yeah.
Can't think of his name. But.
And I am forgetting his name right now, too. His son was in the Air Force, and he came down to see his son at, I believe it was at Tinker, and he'd called me, and he wanted to go by and see Chub. And Chub wanted to see him, and I'll think of his name in a second. I took him up there and left him. I stayed there for about 30 minutes, and this would happen a lot with me and Chub. If he had a friend that came in there, I felt like it was their time, and I didn't stay in the room. Right. And I did the same thing with this fella. I walked out and just I drove around Caney for about an hour or so and let Chub and this guy have their own time. Right. But this fella had told me that Chub hadn't told him anything about the murder. But he did know about this other fella that disappeared up there a little bit. But that stuff's in the book, too.
Yeah.
I'm going to sell a book or two here today.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, the book's available right here at the museum.
Yeah.
Online, Ben Johnson Museum, BenJohnsonCowboyMuseum.com.
And I'm going to autograph them, all of them, before I leave here today.
You've got a new book, too, don't you, Before the Dew?
I do have a new book, but we pulled that off of the shelves. We're not... You can get them online on my website, originalbuffalodale.com, but I have pulled those books off the shelves. I don't feel like that I did it justice. And also, one of the Mullendore family, it's got a little bit more personal stuff on the Mullendore family. And I understand one of the Mullendore family's not overly thrilled with it. And I think I'm going to reword it a little bit. Mm-hmm. So if you've got one, you better hold on to it, because they're not going to be. I'm thinking about burning the rest of them.
We're sold out of them.
Yeah,
we're sold out.
Oh,
of
you
them.
had them for a while?
We carried them.
Why didn't you give me one?
Well, if I'd have known they were going to be such a rare book, Jimbo, I'd have got a whole bunch of them, actually.
Yeah, they're all out everywhere. The ones that still had them, I bought them back.
Yeah.
So.
What else you doing now, Buffalo Dale? You working on another book?
I'm kind of working on cleaning that one up. I've been contacted for a film on this. A couple of different people during the filming of Killers of the Flower Moon here. Gettner Drummond represents me, and a fellow named Bob Funk in Oklahoma City owns Express Ranches, Express Employment. His personal lawyer represent me, and when someone comes up and asks me about film rights or something, I just refer them to Gettner, and I figure if they're for real, Gettner will call me one of these days and have me come sign something. But I think Gettner's a pretty good fella. When I got subpoenaed and I was having a lot of trouble, I'd never met Gettner, but I was friends of Reed Drummond's brother, Michael Drummond, who died recently, or Michael Smith, who died recently, and I thought I'd get a hold of Gettner and see if he could help me, although I'd never met him, and he accepted me into his office, gave me some good advice on this subpoena, had Lori Fulbright from Tulsa come to his office and interview me, and he stood back there to make sure I didn't say something I wasn't supposed to, so I think pretty highly of Gettner. I hope he's our next Attorney General.
That's what I was going to say. Who's you going to represent you when he becomes Attorney General?
Well, Bob Funk's attorney, pretty busy. Bob's got several personal attorneys that just work for Bob, but I just get advice from those guys and Cody.
Yeah. Well, I've thought for years that
I'll give you some advice.
I've thought for years that it should be a movie. I mean, it's just got enough twists and turns, and to me, it'd be a great movie.
You couldn't make this stuff up.
No.
I mean, if I was making up a book, I couldn't make all this stuff up.
Right.
And I think it would be great again for Pawhuska and Bartlesville and the surrounding communities if they made a real Western. You know, they don't make real Westerns. I've talked to several people at the board members. I've got 3 board members at the Cowboy Hall of Fame that are giving me advice that are tied up to this. Ernest Borgnine wanted to play EC Mullendore's dad, Gene, and I'd talked to him quite a bit about it, and he was all on board. And about 2 weeks after the last time I talked to him, he died.
Yeah.
But I've talked to many of the guys. Joel McRae's grandson, Wyatt, is tied up with me in this. There's a guy from Disney that's tied up with me on the film, but it's hard to it ain't easy putting a movie together, a big-time movie, you know, so...
Hey, all you movie people out there, get a hold of Buffalo Dale or one of his attorneys, and let's get this deal made. Let's do it.
I thought you and Marty were pretty tight.
Well, I yelled at him from across the street, and he waved at me real big.
Just had one finger up in the air, though.
Yeah, I said, Marty, and he went. And he was turning like that, and you know how a camper trailer that goes in the back of a pickup is pretty low.
Right.
He was turning like that, waving at me, and he almost hit his head on the nose of the camper trailer. Right. So I about took out Marty just by yelling at him. Yeah. So.
Well, you know, you don't know who these people are behind the movie scenes. You've got Robert De Niro, who bought a book, by the way, and Martin Scorsese and the other fella, the big name from Titanic. Mm-hmm. But it's those people that are walking the streets, the money people, that you don't know are the ones behind this movie. And that's the ones I was hoping on selling a book to, those folks that you may not... De Niro, you know, he came up, and I was out on the street autographing books, and I said, well, what's your name, brother? And he said, just put... And I didn't know who it was, so I had my head down. And he said, just write your name in there. And I looked up at him, and I started to write my name in there, and I said, boy, you look a lot like that Robert De Niro fella. And he smiled at me and he said, everybody says that. And as soon as he said that, people gathered around him. He took my book and ran off. But it's the people you don't know that I was trying to get this book out to. Those are the ones that will take it to a movie. It's not the De Niros, or, I mean, if he got bit by it, it'd help, of course, or the Corsases. It's those money people.
Sure.
And we sold almost 5,000 books just this summer through the Ben Jonson Museum and the Buck and Flamingo and Lori Ranch. And some of those books went to those movie people. So, you know, maybe we'll get a call one of these days and we'll do another cast with Robert De Niro or somebody.
Well, yeah. Well, the Killers of the Flower Moon book, actually, Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio, they bought the rights to that book for a movie before they ever published it. They knew how great that book was going to be. So if one of those guys got your book in their hands, you never know.
Yep, you just
never know.
And that's who we were shooting for, is somebody that you don't know, you know, that might pick up the book, take it back to...
well, they were all here.
Yeah. And the fellow that's here every morning with the long hair, married to...
Sissy Spacek?
Sissy Spacek.
I said hi to that guy every single day, and he never waved at me. He never done anything, because he parked right across the street from the museum. I would say, hello, Mr. Fisk. And he would just look at me like I was a crazy guy. And
I approached him the same way I did Chub. I did the same thing. When I sat in a director's chair, he didn't say nothing back to me. So from then on, I never acknowledged him. He started coming around and talking to me. That was the approach I went to Chub. And this guy started talking to me. And the last day I was in town before I went to Santa Fe on a book signing swing, he came by and I said, I'm not going to see you again. And we shook hands and said, I'm reading that book. And so, you know, it's people like that that might pass it to someone they know.
Oh, for sure.
And, you know, it helps if you get a De Niro, you know, that's really interested, but he's not the one behind, he's not the money behind it. He's just the name. So
Who would play Chub?
Ooh. Who would you think played Chub, Jimbo?
Well, I'm just thinking. I don't know. I'll come up with somebody in a minute.
Yeah, I think so. Who do you got in mind to play Chub? If you had to pick your perfect actor.
the fella from Tombstone that shot Billy the Kid, what is that fellow's name? He played Doc Holliday.
Oh,
Val
Kilmer.
Val Kilmer.
He's old though now.
He's in rough shape.
My
Of course,
attorney,
Chub was old in a lot of this story.
the attorney in Oklahoma City represents Val Kilmer, and supposedly Val Kilmer's not in best of health. Mm-hmm. But he said that he did talk to Val out in Santa Fe and mentioned it. But I don't think Val Kilmer's in very good health. Or
He
something.
could play the sick Chub.
He could be the old Chub.
Yes.
But we got to have somebody that beating up those guys at McAllister Prison. The young Chub.
You haven't thought about this?
No, not really.
You got to be kidding me. All right. Everyone put in the comments who you think should play Chub and all, everybody. And I'll pass it right along to Buffalo Dale for y'all.
Then I'll pass it on to the lawyers and...
Right, there you go.
So on and so forth. We probably got him in all kinds of trouble with his lawyers today,
Probably,
Jimbo.
Yeah, I probably got my phone going to be ringing right now.
Well, Jimbo, do you have anything else for old Buffalo Dale?
Well, just thank him for coming in. And wow, what an interesting story. And I just encourage everybody to come by the Buck and Flamingo or the Ben Jonson Cowboy Museum and buy a book. It's a great book. Like I said, I read it and couldn't hardly put it down. I've never read a book that size that quick.
They sell that book everywhere, probably even on the is it on Amazon?
They're almost $100 on Amazon. We took it off Amazon. They wanted to raise their rate that we agreed on. And the woman that represents me said, we ought to take it off. And I said, just take it off. And as soon as we took it off, people started reselling them on Amazon. So, yeah, they're about $100 on Amazon. But on my website, Original Buffalo Dale, you can get them. They're cheaper if you come down here and buy them at the museum. And I sure wish people would quit lending them out, because people come by and tell me they've read the book. Aunt Betty lent it, or Uncle Bob, and I got it from his son who'd read it. It costs us money every time you lend them books out. Tell people to go buy their own.
I'm going to loan mine to my wife, and that's
Thank
the only
you.
one.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
The wives are okay. They're probably paid for it.
Right.
Well, Buffalo Dale, we appreciate you coming, and thank you for telling us all those great stuff. What's the deal with the pants here?
Well,
I'm
my
liking
weekly column for 20 years always ends with "Till next time, I'll see you down the road." And I get asked about these pants quite a bit. And when you're on work release from the prison, you got to wear pants with a yellow stripe down the leg. So that's what I tell people these yellow stripes about. I'm just on work release for a little bit.
Well, everybody, until next week, this has been another great edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast. Hey, take us out with your famous line again one more time.
Till next time, I'll see you down the road.